All right, welcome back for chapter 2. I am going to try to read the next chapter of Gregor and the Code of Claw, although my dog is being very annoying, so we'll see how he does. Chapter 2. Marith rose to block his way. Wait, Gregor, it's not so simple now. We're at war. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, said Gregor. His fingers fumbled in their eagerness to buckle on his belt. Is Aries still in the hospital? He knew his bond would be as anxious as he was to rejoin their friends. Yes, down the hall, but listen a moment, Marith began. Great. Then we can get going, said Gregor. He moved for the door only to find that he was being lifted in the air and thrust back against the bed. Marith might have lost his leg, but he could still toss Gregor around, no problem. Listen, said Marith. During wartime, you are a soldier. Perhaps the most valuable one we have. You cannot go running off when the mood strikes you. You will be expected to follow orders. Whose orders? Asked Gregor. Solivet's, said Marith. Solivet's, said Gregor, genuinely thrown. As far as he knew, she was no longer in any position to give anyone orders. I thought she was locked up in her room and had to go on trial for causing the plague. The trial was put on hold once it was known that Luxa had declared war, said Marith. But why? That doesn't change what Solivet did, said Gregor. She still ordered the doctors to make the plague into a weapon. She still killed all those people and bats. She almost killed my mom. Yes, sorry. Lily's interrupting me. Real quick. I'm trying to read.
Okay. Hello, Seth. Hi, Emily.
Okay, goodbye. Always interruptions. Alice in place. By accident. Her plan was to kill the rats, said Marith. Now that we are at war with them, a person who thinks of little but killing rats is of great value. So the council has reinstated her as head of the Regalian army. Head of the... No way, exclaimed Gregor. He thought that maybe they'd make her the leader of a squadron or something, but now she was back in charge of everything. Couldn't they get someone else? I will tell you later, Lindley. Go away. There is no human, save yourself, who rats fear as much. Solivet is both cunning and ruthless in war. It was felt we needed her to survive. But the trial will never happen now, said Gregor bitterly. It wouldn't. The war would erupt and blank everything else out. As the hatred against the rats built, the humans would think that Solivet had a good idea in turning the plague germs into a weapon. Despite all of the deaths she caused to her own people, she would be seen as heroic, not criminal. Gregor thought of his mom struggling to breathe somewhere in the hospital. The purple scars that Aries' fur still could not quite cover. All of the people and bats and rats who had died. That's not right, Marith, said Gregor. Do you think it's right? Sorry, the dog stole my blanket. Marith sighed and averted his eyes. He released Gregor and took an awkward step back. Whatever my private opinion of the situation is, it is of no matter. Solivet is in command now. Not of me, said Gregor. One thing he was certain. He was not going to his death on Solivet's terms. He was going to go on his own. Be careful to whom you say that, said Gregor, said Marith quietly. Not everyone here is your friend. And with that, the soldier limped out of the room. Gregor took a few deep breaths to get a handle on himself and then unbuckled his sword belt and placed the blade back in the corner of the room. He wiped up the pudding he'd knocked on the floor and neatly reset the tray. Then he lay back down in bed to look like a model patient while he worked everything out in his head. Marith was right. Not everybody in Regalia was Gregor's friend. Plenty of people would be more than happy to spy on him for Solivet. Gregor didn't know what she had in store for him, but it was unlikely that it involved him hopping on Aries and flying straight back to the Firelands. Probably he would be part of some master plan. Whatever Gregor wanted would be of no consequence. She would view him as a weapon to use at her discretion. If he was going to get back to the Firelands, he would have to do it in secret, and he would have to do it carefully. What's your plan? He heard Rip Red's voice in his head. The rat was trying to break him of the habit of flying off the handle and taking action without thinking of its consequences. What's your plan? First of all, I can't let anyone else guess what I want to go back, Gregor thought. He was pretty sure Marith wouldn't tell anyone, but he couldn't count on other people's loyalty. Gregor's initial impulse had been to run straight to Ares, but that would be odd. If he were not obsessed with returning to the Firelands, if he were planning to stay in Regalia like a good little soldier, wouldn't he ask to see his mom first? He felt a flush of shame. Shouldn't he have asked to see his mom first either way? Yes. Only the truth was, if she was well enough to see him, she was going to be both furious about his trip to the Firelands and adamant that he was to return to New York City immediately, which he wasn't going to do. So, sorry, the dog is attacking me. So he would either have to fight with her, openly defy her, or lie to her. All three options were lousy. Underneath it all, though, he was still aching to see her. When a doctor came by a few minutes later, Gregor asked if he could visit her, and was given permission to do so, briefly. It is fine to use your knee, good even, but take it slowly for the first few days, said the doctor, helping him get into a pair of sandals. Got it, said Gregor, and made a big show of walking very carefully down to his mom's room. He had to wear a mask, not for his own protection, but for hers. Gregor had underestimated what a relapse could be. His mother was as sick as she had been when he had first seen her with the plague. Sicker, maybe. Then, at least, she'd had the energy to order him home. Now she was too weak to even speak. All of her effort went into breathing. When he held her hand, the skin was hot and dry from fever. Her eyes had a distant look. This isn't the plague, right? Gregor asked the doctor. No, this is a lung infection. I believe you call it pneumonia in the overland, said the doctor. But she could go home if she was well enough to travel, said Gregor. If she was well enough to travel, but she is not, said the doctor. Gregor stroked his mother's cheek. Don't worry, it's going to be all right. He couldn't tell if she understood him or not. Outside the room, the doctor took Gregor aside and spoke in a whisper. At first, Gregor assumed it was for his mom's sake, but then he realized the doctor was afraid of anyone hearing his words. Warrior, if she were my mother, I would use whatever influence I have to get her back to the overland. Your hospitals could treat her as well as ours now, and with the war commencing, the palace may come under attack. She may even have to be moved to the Fount. But you said she was too sick to travel, said Gregor. That's what I must say, and it's true, for a time of peace, said the doctor. But now you must weigh the dangers of her staying here during a time of war. He looked around nervously. Please keep my counsel to yourself. And then he swiftly walked away. For a moment, Gregor felt torn as the desire to get to the Firelands fought with his need to get his mother's safety. His mother won. His friends in the Firelands had one another and an army to lean on. His mother had no one but himself. Gregor left the hospital without permission and found Vicus in the room off the high hall. When are you sending the next message to my father? He asked. I was about to do so now, Gregor. Is there something you wish to include? Said Vicus. Yeah, my mom, said Gregor. Vicus rubbed a hand over his eyes. I have tried, Gregor, 3 times already. The council has denied their requests. Gregor knew Vicus couldn't officially move his mom without the council members' authority, but he couldn't help being frustrated by the way the old man constantly deferred to them. But she can't stay here during the war. What if the rats attack the palace? You'd have to move her somewhere else anyway. Gregor thought he could say as much without getting the doctor in trouble. I have made this argument, said Vicus, but the council does not accept it. They refuse to let her go. My wife has convinced them that your mother's health will not bear the move. Suddenly, Gregor understood what was going on. It's not about her health, is it? It's about me. It's about keeping me here, he said. Solivet was holding his mother hostage down here. She knew Gregor would never leave without his mom. Vicus's silence confirmed his words. You tell the council they better keep her alive. If she dies, you just lost a warrior, said Gregor. Are you sure you wish me to say this? Asked Vicus. Why wouldn't I? Said Gregor. Well, it gains you nothing, and it reveals much of your hand, said Vicus. I myself find it wiser to keep certain thoughts to myself until they can be used to my advantage. Vicus was right. The doctors in the hospital would do their best to heal his mother. Threatening the council members would only increase their suspicion of Gregor at a time when he was trying to appear tactable. I see what you mean. Thanks, said Gregor. At least Vicus was looking out for him. He headed back to the hospital, gripped by fear for his mother. Could he move her on his own? No, she was way too sick. That would take a whole team of doctors. When she got home, she'd have to go straight to the hospital, and then the questions would begin. Even so, Gregor would rather gamble on his dad and Mrs. Cormacci coming up with some crazy story to explain his mom's condition than to risk having her down here during the war. It was all a moot point, though, because of Solivet. She would never let his mom go until she was through using Gregor. A voice came out of the past. I was just thinking, it did not take long for my mother to get her claws into you. Hamnet. That's what Hamnet would have said on their first meeting in the jungle, before he had been Gregor's guide, before the ants had killed him. Hamnet, a famous warrior himself, had fled Regalia because his conscience would no longer allow him to fight, and he knew his mother, Solivet, would try to force him. Who would know better than Hamnet what it felt like to have Solivet's claws in him? Well, they were digging into Gregor now in a whole new way, but it only increased Gregor's resolve to defy her. He returned to his hospital room to find that another meal had shown up. He ate to keep up appearances. Probably needed it anyway. He might be back on a diet of fish and mushrooms pretty soon. Then he went to find Ares. Since he'd seen his mom, this would not raise any red flags. Ares was just finishing up his meal when Gregor came in. A nurse was gathering up the platters that had held the bat's food. How are you feeling? Asked Gregor. A bit stiff, but I am well, said the bat. His voice, which was usually a low purr, was hoarse from the volcanic ash. Think you'd be up for a game of chess later? Asked Gregor. This was entirely for the nurse's benefit. Gregor and Ares had never played chess before, never even spoken about it, but Gregor had seen a lot of people and bats playing it in the hospital when they were recovering. It seemed like something the nurse would be in favor of. The question is, are you up for it? Asked Ares. That sounds like a challenge, said Gregor. The nurse seemed to approve. I will see if we have the board available. She collected the dishes and left the room. Gregor and Ares waited a few moments and then spoke in urgent whispers. We must get back to the Fireland, said Ares. I know, but Maris says we're under Solivet's command now, said Gregor. Can you meet me at the place? The place was a pretty general term, but he knew Ares would understand he was referring to the spring-fed lake known as the Spout. There was a secret passage that led to it from a turtle made of stone in the old nursery. In 1 hour, said Ares. The nibbler pups are still in the nursery. If your sister is not with Hazard, she will likely be there too. I will find a way, said Gregor, although persuading Boots, a litter of mouse babies, and probably their nanny too, to look the other way while he flipped open that big stone turtle shell and climbed through it was going to be a big trick. The nurse came in holding a chessboard. I have a board, but no pieces at the moment. Some will be available soon. You know, I think there's a set in the museum, said Gregor. I'm supposed to exercise this knee some anyway. I'll go get it. There actually was one of those little magnetic travel chessboards, complete with pieces in the museum, so it was a perfect excuse. Gregor stopped by his hospital room and buckled on his sword belt. If anyone asked, he could always say that he was trying to get used to the feeling of wearing it, but he still waited in the hall until it was free of doctors and nurses to slip out of the hospital. He took a less traveled route to the museum as well, and managed to avoid running into anyone but a group of schoolchildren. When he got to the museum, the first thing that caught his eye was a brown cardboard box that was sealed with masking tape. The words, "For Gregor," had been printed neatly across the top in red marker. He recognized the handwriting as Mrs. Cormacci's. When had this box come? Today? Yesterday? Or during his week or so of absence in the Firelands? Gregor ripped open the box and found a note right up on top. As he read the words, he could hear Mrs. Cormacci's voice in his head. Dear Gregor, well, this is a fine how do you do. Everyone's in a state because you've disappeared on some picnic, but I feel certain you've gotten yourself mixed up in some kind of funny business down there. I know it's strange, but I'm not even worried. Not about you or Boots. Although your parents, well, that's another story. Do you realize, I wonder, what it does to your family when you go off? Gregor felt like someone had hit him in the stomach. Of course he realized. Of course he knew. Hadn't he been the one waiting for his dad for 2.5 years? Didn't his family situation gnaw away at him every time he was on some mission? Now you're in regalia because you're reading this, so it's a good time to step back and take a hard look at things. I know most of what happens to you down there is out of your control. I know you're only doing what you feel you have to do, but your family is hurting right now. All I'm saying is, don't let yourself get killed, or you'll have an awful lot of explaining to do. Love, Mrs. Cormacci. Why had she written that about him being killed? It was almost as if she had read the prophecy. But if she had, she would also know that his death was one of those things out of his control. As for explaining things once he was gone, well, that didn't even make sense to him. Why was she even saying this stuff to him? Maybe she meant it as a joke. Of course, it being Mrs. Cormacci, maybe she didn't. Wait, there was something else at the bottom. P.S. Lizzie helped make the cookies. She says to share them with the rat. So Lizzie was home from sleepaway camp. He knew she'd be a wreck. Even when things were going fine, his sister was anxious. He could see her face now, her furrowed brow, the way no 8-year-old kid should ever be. Skinny, little, nervous, way too smart for her age Lizzie, worrying about him and Boots, worrying about his mom and dad, even worrying about cranky old Rip Red. Next time I see Lizzie, Gregor thought. And then he realized he might never see her again, or see any of them back home, because he was never leaving the Underland. He was going to die down here. Gregor watched as the note floated from his hand and came to a rest gently on the floor, and that's when Sandwich's words finally hit him. When the warrior has been killed. The room spun around and he clutched to a shelf to keep from falling. He felt an immense pressure in his chest, as if he were in danger of breaking into 1,000 pieces and was unable to draw a breath. No, I don't want this. I don't want to die, he thought. His entire body began shaking and he tried to push the threat from his mind, but it was too powerful. I can't do this. I can't. I've just got to go home. Luxa was right. It was too much to ask of him. To give his life, his future, to give everything he had for the Underlanders. I'm getting out of here, going to Boots and my mom, and get home and never look back. For an instant, he thought he really might do it. But then what? What happened to everyone who he loved down here? They would all die as the prophecy foretold. He could never let that happen, would never let that happen. So then, Gregor sank to the floor, panting, as waves of tremors ran through him. He struggled to get a hold of himself. This had to stop. He couldn't flip out every time he thought about what lay before him. Of all the people he would never see, or all the things he would never do, he would be worthless, of no use at all. He had to have something in his mind to hold on to, something that gave him strength. Images flew through his head of his family, of his friends, of places and things he loved, but none of them were any help. Then he remembered the stone knight in the cloisters, cold, hard, unyielding, long since removed from anything in life that could hurt him. A long time ago the knight had fought, maybe died in a horrible battle too. Everybody had to die eventually, but now he was invulnerable, sleeping on his marble bed, safe, peaceful even. Somehow the thought of this other soldier from another time comforted Gregor in a way that nothing living could. He had gone through something awful, but it was over, and now he was in a place where no one could ever harm him again. The shaking began to subside. Gregor inhaled, and the pain in his chest lost its grip. That's me. I have to remember, that's me. From now on, he thought. I'm that knight. I'm made of stone, and in the end, nothing can touch me. Okay then, that's how it is. As he calmed down, he remembered that Ares was waiting for him. He had things to do, people to help, and time was short. Gregor retrieved the note and pulled himself to his feet. He saw a foil-wrapped package that had to be the cookies, but the box was too deep to hold only cookies. He lifted out the foil package, and his heart skipped a beat. 2 flashlights and a big stack of batteries. And a brand new pair of sneakers. The good kind. Mrs. Cormachi. How did she know? How did she always seem to know what he needed? The waterproof flashlight she had given him before he'd crossed the waterway. The work boots that had saved his toes from being destroyed by the acid in the jungle. Could she see the dangers he would encounter in those tarot cards of hers, even though Gregor would never let her do a reading on him? Or was she just a good guesser? Gregor added a new roll of duct tape and 2 water bottles to the box. The bottles were the kind joggers used in the Central Park. They were empty, but he could fill them up at a stream along the way to the Firelands. He looked for a new backpack, but all he could find was a small pink one with thin cords for straps. He emptied out a lady's wallet, a makeup case, and a book of maps of Manhattan, and a hairbrush, and stuck it in his box. It didn't look like something a warrior would carry, but it would hold his supplies until he got... It would hold his supplies, and that was all that really mattered. Just ignore me for a minute. Then he placed the cookies back on top of the whole thing. He wouldn't get ready to travel until he was in a secret passageway that led to the spout. Remembering his story to the nurse, he placed... Sorry, he's confused by this. He placed the magnetic chessboard on top of the cookies. He probably wouldn't see her again, but he wanted to cover all his bases. Now he had to get to the old nursery and into the passageway. Gregor picked up the box. He walked out of the museum and down the hall. Taking your time, looking natural, he thought, you can do this. Then he turned the corner and pulled up short. Solivet was standing in front of him. Behind her were 2 men. The last time Gregor had seen Solivet was months ago, when he had arrived back from the jungle. She had been in the council meeting where they had arrested Dr. Naviv. By that time, Gregor had been treated for his injuries and come out of anesthesia. Stop distracting me. Dr. Naviv had been executed and Solivet confined to her rooms.
Hey, Lindley might be able to help you read.
Probably, thank you, Mr. A. You're very helpful. Gregor had been glad she'd been taken away to a place where he couldn't see her, where he didn't have to deal with what she'd done to his mom and Aries and Howard and countless others. But here she was, the woman who wouldn't think twice about letting his mom die if it meant holding on to Gregor. In 1 second, he realized how much he hated her and how careful he had to be. She was now in command of him. Gregor, she said with a warm smile. He smiled back. Hey, Solivet, how have you been? Very well. And yourself? She asked. Doing all right, he said. What have you there? She asked, nodding at the box. Mrs. Cormachi sent me some cookies. I thought I'd take them back up to the hospital and spread the goodness around, said Gregor. Want one? He peeled back the foil on the cookies, and the delicious smell of oatmeal raisin filled the hallway. Why not? Solivet accepted a cookie and took a bite. She chewed it thoughtfully and nodded her approval. Excellent. So I need to talk to you pretty soon, right? Asked Gregor as he shifted the box to his hip. Seeing as what you want me to do. Mary said you're in charge of the war. Yes, and you are, of course, very precious to me. Know you, Horatio and Marcus. Solivet casually gestured to the men behind her. Hi. Gregor gave them a wave, and they nodded back. For the first time, he noticed how they were dressed. They each wore protective gear made of leather and metal on their chests, legs, and arms. Helmets covered their head. Wicked-looking swords and daggers were at their belts. Are they, like, generals or something? No, Gregor, they are your personal guards, said Solivet. We are very concerned with your safety. Personal guards, great. Her meaning was beginning to dawn on him, but he just laughed. I sure could have used them a few days ago. Doesn't seem like I'd need them here, though. Aren't even any rats around. The guards are not to keep the rats out, said Solivet pleasantly. They are to keep you in. And that is the end of chapter 2. Tune in later And maybe the rest of my family can interrupt us for chapter 3 too. Bye.